Hello friends, I hope this finds you well. So I'm going to do my best to put this into concise, cohesive, logical train of thought for all of you, and we'll see how it goes. So I have been learning a lot about wild horses since I adopted Ruby, who was a wild horse, nearly 9 months ago, and especially over the last month or so, I've been learning more and more and have interacted with quite a few who have been rounded up and are in the process of being gentled. So I have some experience with them on the other side of roundup, and I've connected in with quite a few who have been rounded up. So again, on the other side. So I'm also reading this book called Wild Horse Country by Dave Phillips. Pretty sure that's his name. Highly recommended if you're interested. And there's kind of a divide, if you will, at least that I see within the wild horse topic, if you will, discussions. There's the BLM on one side and wild horse advocates on the other. And I guess you can put ranchers in there as well. And without getting super into it, the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, federal agency, has deemed certain areas within the West as acceptable areas for wild horses to live. However, there's also a number that is the appropriate management level, the appropriate number of wild horses that can live on that area or that land without completely running it down and making it unusable for all wildlife. And all of these, so these are called the herd management areas. All of these, for the most part, are above what the BLM has said is an acceptable amount of horses. Hence why there's roundups. Also on these lands, so these are pretty deserted lands that people don't want to live on, right? Desolate, desert, harsh living conditions, not like a lush area or even anything that looks like this. I would assume very rare. I don't know what they all look like, but I don't think they look this nice. Anyway, also on these lands are the natural wildlife, and also ranchers are able to get leasing agreements and essentially be able to graze their cattle on the land as well. So there's wildlife, there's cattle and sheep and ranchers stuff at different times of the year. And then there's wild horses, because wild horses aren't really deemed wildlife and they're not domestic. They're stuck in this in between because they can't really not be, right? We have domesticated horses, and horses are so unique. Each one looks different that it's hard for us to look at them and be like, oh yeah, you're just like a herd of elk. Not just, don't get me wrong, but you're a herd of elk. We can't distinguish necessarily who you are, and we don't have domesticated elk that we have these great bonds and connections with. Maybe some people do, but not as a whole. And so it's hard to distinguish between wild and domesticated because we have these connections with these animals that go centuries and centuries into the past, right? So they're stuck in this in between. And due to that, some of them live wild and some of them live in captivity. Some live in lush lands, acres and acres of land, and some are stuck in corrals. So neither are great options because neither of them are living as they would in the wild, meaning they're not living in families. So the boys are all separated into one, the girls are all separated into the other, and they live amongst their own gender, and they're not able to intermix because they don't want them to reproduce. So that's not really living wild, even the ones that have acres and acres of land to live on. So I would argue that the issue isn't necessarily with the BLM and how they're regulating it, though I think that there are likely some ways that can be improved because insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same result. It's kind of what's happening here. And I wouldn't say that the issue lies with, advocates saying wild horses need XYZ or we can't put them down, like all of that, which it's hard, right? There's probably upwards million of cats and dogs that get euthanized every year from shelters. But we don't do that to wild horses. Now, it breaks my heart that we do that to any animals. However, I digress. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is that what if the issue isn't with any one group, but the issue is with us in general, with humans wanting more, with humans wanting to go and grab and take, and then fencing things off so that it is theirs and nobody else's. What if the issue is that we have taken too much, that we have told everyone else, and by everyone else I mean animals, the earth, that they don't matter as much as your need and want to have this plot of land. Whether that land is 5 acres, that land is 1,000,000 acres, whatever. But when we go and we take and we fence things off and say, you're no longer allowed here, I understand this is the only water source, but it is now mine, and you don't get a say, and if you come on my property, I will kill you because it's my property. Animals don't understand that. How can they understand anything? What they understand is survival and thriving. They don't understand, oh, this fence means I'm not allowed, but the water's there, so I'm gonna go drink anyway. And I've been connecting in more and more with Gaia, and lately she's been talking a lot about responsibility and how we need to take responsibility for our part in everything. So what is our part in the wild horse situation, if you will? I mean, there are nearly 60,000 wild horses in BLM holding. So whether that's on acreage, like thousands of acres in the Midwest with ranchers who the BLM pays for them to have these horses on their land, or they're in these corrals, there are 60,000 of these horses that are not living in their natural way of living. So what is our part in that, right? How can we do better? How can we take less? And I'm not saying you can't have this land, but how can we make it more accessible to other beings that need it to survive? When can we say we've taken too much, right? Is it that the whole entire country needs to be owned by somebody or something before we say, okay, we're done. Like, there's nothing else to take, so I guess, like, it's done. We, as a species, / as our country too, founded on, we take all. We take it all. we don't think about the long-term effects. We take it for us now, and we worry about the long-term effects for the next generation and the generation after that, until we're in global warming crisis, all the things are collapsing, and then we're like, oh, guess we got to do something about it now. Like, how can we start to have a more long-term effect thinking wise, and start thinking, how can we all live in harmony together, and what's my responsibility within this whole grand scheme of things, right? Is cattle the future? Is that where we want to be putting our money and our energy and our land? Is it something different? People have very strong opinions about this. I get it. Livelihoods are built on this. I'm not saying we shouldn't have anything. I'm saying we're not taking responsibility for our part in it. What's my part in it? How have I either helped or not helped the situation, right? How can I be of more service and take more accountability and therefore help others? How can I blame less and own more? Own more of my actions, own more of my words, own more of what I'm doing and how I'm showing up in the world. How can I do that more and blame less? Because in the end, you can't control anybody else. You can't control the federal government. Man, I used to work for it. If I could have controlled it, man, there's so many things I would have changed. But we can't control others. We can't control what they do. We can only control what we do. So you can control what you do with your land, what you do with your money, how you use your voice, how you show up in the world. And if you're showing up in the world and you're using your voice to blame, to shame, to put more negativity out there, that's not helping anybody. So how can we start to shift how we're showing up, in the ways that we're showing up, in the words we're using when we show up, to create more harmony on this earth between our own species, between all the other species? We're here to be co-creative with all of it. Currently, we are not. Currently, we are taking and forcing and blaming and not taking responsibility. So, my invitation is for all of us to take some time to see where we're not taking responsibility for things, where we're trying to control someone or something that we have no control over, and then asking ourselves, what's a way that I can show up that's going to be helpful, peaceful, and in harmony with who I am, what I stand for, what I'm about, and with how I can uphold this legacy for the earth, for the animals, for the humans, and for the next generations. So just some food for that.